Hello and welcome to the Ariel Knits YouTube channel. Today we are going to go over the different types of knitting needles and when they are used. Hopefully this video will help you understand what exactly straight needles, double pointed needles, and circular needles are. I personally was very confused when I first started knitting, so without further ado, let's get started. Before we start looking at the different types of needles, I first want to go over the difference between knitting something flat and knitting something in the round. Understanding this is crucial to being able to understand how the different types of needles do their jobs. If you already have an understanding of these concepts, feel free to skip ahead. So first is knitting flat. Knitting something flat means that you are knitting back and forth. So you knit a right side, you turn your work, and then you knit a wrong side. Blankets, for example, are knit flat. A lot of scarves are knit flat. Some sweaters are made by knitting flat panels and then sewing them together. So here is a scarf. So you knit this side, you turn it, then you knit the other side, and you just flip it back and forth and back and forth. Knitting in the round. So to knit something in the round means that you are continuously knitting in a circle. You never turn your work, like flipping back and forth, and then you just knit on the right side. So hats, socks, and sweaters can be knit in the round. So for example, these socks were knit in the round. So see, it's a circular thing, and it's not seamed. It's just all the way around. So you just knit this in circles. So that's what it means to knit something in the round. So now that we've laid out that basic foundation, let's get to our needles. First, let's look at straight needles. These are the stereotypical knitting needles that you've probably seen somewhere on TV or in books. Straight needles are perfect for knitting small flat projects like scarves, some shawls, dishcloths, etc. Straight needles come in a lot of different lengths, but typically the big box stores in America will only carry like 8 to 10 inch long needles. So this is their length, which are way too short to be knitting big blankets on, because you wouldn't be able to fit a big blanket on this, at least not comfortably. But we'll get to the solution for that in a minute. So here's my straight needles. I'm knitting a row. I'm a continental knitter, so I'm going to knit this way. But I knit all the way to the end. So I'm finishing to knit this side, and since I'm knitting it flat, now that I've reached the end, I'm just going to turn my work and knit back the other way. Now let's look at my personal favorite, circular needles. So here's some circular needles. I love circular needles because they can be used to both knit in the round and knit flat, and I'll demonstrate both of those. So let's first do knitting in the round with circular needles. So as you can see, I have this circle here, and it's made like you cast on a line and then you just start knitting at where you first cast on. Like you just take your line of cast on stitches and you connect them front to back, or caboose to whatever it is. I don't know, but it's just the same. You just knit, and then you just keep knitting and knitting and knitting in the round. So you just keep going around and around and around, and you keep track of where your rows start. Typically you'll put a stitch marker right here to mark the beginning of your round. Knitting something flat. So I'm gonna take the scarf that I was knitting before, because I showed you that on the straight needles, and I'll show you how I'd knit that on circular needles. So I just reached the end right here, so I'm going to flip it, and because it's flat, right? So I flip it so that we'll be working back in that direction. Then I take the other needle, and I'll just start knitting back this way. Just using it like I would use a normal straight needle, but there's just this there. Otherwise, it's all the same, but the stitches aren't going to fall off because they're going to hang on this cord. I love circular needles. They are extremely versatile. Circular needles come in all different lengths, so you could definitely find a length to knit a blanket on. So that's how I would solve the blanket issue. Finally, we have double pointed needles. So these are these funny needles that have points on both ends, and they come in packs of 4 to 5 needles. So circular needles didn't really come about until later on in the knitting game, but the very first artifact we found that was knit was actually something that was knit in the round. So we know that knitting in the round has been around since the beginning. So how was that accomplished if there weren't circular needles? So that was accomplished with these double pointed needles, or DPNs for short. These are used to knit in the round. So here I have a sock, and that's being knit in the round. And as you can see, I've split up my stitches on 4 out of 5 of my double pointed needles. You always want to have one extra double pointed needle, and I will show you why in a second. But I have all my stitches evenly spaced out. You can see that it's making this square, which is like a circle. Not really, but it is. Anyways, but you can see that it's making this circular or square connection, like it's all connected all the way around, like it was on circular needles. So then you take your extra DPN, and then you just start knitting. So here I'll knit sorry for the scratching noise, that's just my stitch marker. And now I have this one off of the stitches, and then I just start working on the next needle. And I just do that all the way around and around and around and around. So here are some photos of double pointed needles being used to make sweaters or larger objects throughout history. Some people, even still today, will make sweaters in the round on double pointed needles. They're just very, very long double pointed needles. Okay, so that is the very basics, but let's move on to some bonus knowledge. Wooden needles versus metal or plastic needles. So, wooden needles tend to grip your yarn more than metal or plastic needles. If you are a beginner, I recommend using wooden needles so that your stitches won't slip around a lot. When I first started trying, I started trying on like these metal needles, and it was extremely frustrating because my stitches kept like slipping off the point. I kept dropping stitches, and wooden needles will help mitigate that. It's not going to prevent it, but it'll help your stitches not slip around as much. So that's all for needles. If you have any further questions or a question that didn't get answered, please leave a comment down below so that we can help you. Now go out there and craft your world.